case of Amanda Collie and Lindy Dobbins. On the morning of August 27, 2015, 36-year-old Amanda Collie returned home to find her house in chaos. Someone had broken into it while she was away. Her house was in disarray, with boxes knocked over, trash cans emptied, and many items broken or damaged, with glass strewn everywhere. Amanda panicked and checked her phone, which had many missed calls and messages from her ex-husband that she didn't want to reply to. At 5:30 a.m., she called her boyfriend and the police for help. She had recently started dating a man named Lamar. At that time, Lamar was driving his pickup truck down a route that led to her house. Meanwhile, the police were on their way to the scene. One officer arrived to assess the danger of the situation. He was to talk to Amanda and assess the damage to her property. The police assessed the situation and left after Amanda chose not to file a formal complaint. Before the police left her home around 9 a.m. that morning, someone came to Amanda's aid. The first person to visit was Lindy Dobbins, Amanda's best friend. At 39 and a mother of 3, Lindy had taken the morning off work to be with Amanda and support her. Lindy was a kind person who always helped others in difficult situations. After a while, their mutual friend Rachel Hendricks joined them. She had dropped her kids off at school and decided to support Amanda since she had some free time. By this time, Lamar was already at Amanda's house. The four of them gathered at Amanda's house, watching the chaos and discussing what had happened while considering their next steps. Amanda was still in shock from the incident and realized that she needed to consult a lawyer before reporting her ex-husband, who she believed was responsible. Eventually, Amanda's ex-husband called her again. This time, she chose to answer, leading to a 14-minute conversation. While they were in the living room, they suddenly heard the sound of shattering glass. A few minutes later, a police officer stopped Lamar on the street. He was running frantically, not paying attention to where he was going, trying to escape Amanda's house. According to him, he left the living room as soon as the shooting started, went down to the laundry room, and then fled through the garage, which was partially open. Lamar reported that unexpectedly, gunfire erupted at Amanda's house. He informed the police officer that he thought the shots were fired from outside the house. He did not observe anyone inside being hit by bullets. He was unable to give the police specific details. Lamar is certain that the attacker is targeting him, leading him to believe that the women inside the house are alive. The situation was dire. Minutes after Lamar left the house, the other women tried to escape. Rachel ran through the living room and through the broken glass front door. She spotted the neighbor's house next door and quickly ran over to hide. After escaping, Rachel called 911 to report that she had escaped but had injured her arm. She suspected that an armed attack had occurred at her friend's house and knew exactly who was likely responsible. Realizing the danger, Rachel instinctively ran away when Lamar told them to hide. She was shocked when the gunfire continued. While speaking to the police, Rachel expressed her concern for her friends and urged the police to come quickly to save them. In the next few minutes, 2 more calls came into the police station, one from Amanda and one from her friend, Lindy. However, during the calls, they only screamed while the gunshots echoed in the background. The police immediately went to Amanda Collie's house to rescue her. Gunshot wounds to Lindy's arms and legs showed that she was trying to defend herself from her attacker. Unfortunately, her efforts were futile. The attacker had fired a full magazine at her, indicating a clear intention to kill. Lindy was discovered at the end of a long corridor, lying in a pool of blood. It seems she tried to escape but was killed before she could get away. Rachel stated that just a few seconds before the shooting started, she looked toward the backyard of the house. There, along the garden path, she saw the outline of a man who then pulled out a weapon through the glass door. A group of people stood behind him. The glass was quite thin, preventing her from seeing exactly who was there. The police corroborated her account by analyzing the locations of the bullet holes in the backyard. On the path, they found several unused cartridges, which were identified as Delroy caliber bullets. Lamar went back to Amanda's house. When the police arrived, he felt assured that they would have the situation under control. Lamar mentioned that he heard gunshots coming from the backyard and believed that he was the perpetrator's target. At that moment, he urged everyone to run. Although he did not see the perpetrator, he suspected that the perpetrator was Amanda's ex-husband, who had spoken to her on the phone just minutes before the attack. Rachel explained that they didn't have enough time to react as quickly as Lamar, so she and Lindy decided to hide in the pantry. She heard Amanda on the other side, probably trying to find a place to hide and possibly running to the bathroom. Seconds later, Rachel heard the front door being broken down. At that moment, the intruder entered the house. He approached the pantry, tried to open the door, and found that it was locked from the inside. The attacker wanted to know where Amanda's boyfriend was. Rachel and Lindy replied that he wasn't there while continuing to hold the door. The intruder then fired through the door, hitting Rachel's arm, causing her to lose her balance. Lindy's leg was now injured, causing her to scream in pain. Amanda was also injured but still alive and screaming near the bathroom. In that brief moment, Rachel jumped up and ran from the house. According to Rachel, the attacker could have been Amanda's ex-husband, James Terry Collie. She recognized his familiar voice behind the door. A few minutes later, James's father called the police to report that his son had just confessed to him that he had caught his wife with a friend. At that point, the police arrived at the house. After the attack, James fled the scene. K9 units were deployed to locate James. They followed James's scent to a nearby street. During the search, a cell phone was found, which was likely left behind by James. Unfortunately, the police were unable to identify the vehicle in which he drove away. He had disappeared from the scene of the crime. The area was searched with specially trained dogs and helicopters, but these efforts yielded no results. Despite an extensive search that lasted several hours, James remained at large, posing a threat to public safety. Fortunately, police arrested James later that evening while he was driving his sister's car. During a search of the car, police discovered a shotgun and 2 Delroy and PGO caliber handguns in the passenger seat, along with a large amount of ammunition. A subsequent examination of the guns confirmed that the bullets matched those found at the crime scene and in Amanda and Lindy's bodies. In addition, glass fragments identical to those found in Amanda's home were discovered. After his arrest, James refused to cooperate with the investigation, claiming that he could not recall anything from the time of the tragic events. Further investigation revealed that James and Amanda had been married for over 8 years and had 2 children. Their relationship then began to deteriorate, leading to their divorce. James moved to his sister's house, 20 kilometers away from their family home, where Amanda and the children continued to live. As the divorce proceedings progressed over the following months, they encountered many difficulties regarding child custody and property division. The two then decided to start new chapters in their lives. James began dating a coworker named Emmy, while Amanda pursued a relationship with Lamar, another coworker from the sporting goods company. Even though the couple's relationship had completely broken down, James was still possessive of his ex-wife Amanda. He suspected that she was seeing someone new and called her several times to find out who it was. Amanda did not share the truth because she feared it would lead to serious problems. As a result, James became increasingly angry and aggressive. He called her frequently, becoming so intrusive that Amanda felt compelled to go to court to get a restraining order to protect herself. The weekend before the attack, Amanda's neighbor and close friend took a photo of a man mowing the lawn in front of Amanda's house. The man was identified as her new boyfriend, Lamar. When James found out, he tried to contact Amanda, insulting her and demanding to know who she was seeing. Amanda lied, claiming that the man in the photo was just a landscaper. James was going crazy because Amanda had found someone new. Early on the morning of August 27th, he planned a terrible act. Surveillance cameras from nearby homes did not capture the moment James, her ex-husband, entered Amanda's house. This was not surprising since he had lived there for a long time and was familiar with the areas not covered by the cameras. He approached the house undetected from the backyard, just as he had intended. The James entered the house around 3 a.m., but found it empty. Frustrated, he started to create chaos, throwing items around and dumping trash from the kitchen bins. He broke the TV and damaged several costly appliances. This destruction seemed aimed at upsetting Amanda. As he caused this damage, he was also getting ready for the terrible actions that were to come. James was looking for evidence that Amanda was having an affair with another man. Eventually, he discovered something that confirmed his suspicions and made him even angrier. At 4:00 a.m., he went to Mike's house, who lived across the street. James knocked loudly, shouted and swore while discussing Amanda in an angry tone. Mike showed James everything he had found in Amanda's house, including some intimate toys that James had never seen before with his ex-wife. Mike knew that James had been given a restraining order prohibiting him from having access to his home or his ex-wife. However, James had violated the order. This could have resulted in a court hearing and possible arrest. Mike tried to calm James down by offering him a drink and suggesting that he go home and rest to avoid making any more impulsive decisions. Unfortunately, James ignored this advice and decided to go to court to resolve the issues related to his first restraining order violation. On the way, he called his father to tell him about the damage he had done to Amanda's home. His father reprimanded him and urged him not to be stupid again. James was arrested and charged with 2 counts of premeditated murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, robbery, and aggravated stalking for violating a court order. James maintained his innocence, claiming amnesia, and was taken to the county jail to await a hearing. The prosecution needed to prove that James attacked Amanda, her friends, and Lamar. Although there was no direct evidence linking him to the crimes, there were multiple witnesses present who confirmed that he was the perpetrator. Police pieced together James' movements on the day of the attack. James arrived at Mike's house around 4:00 a.m. and stayed with Mike until 4:45 a.m. After leaving, James went to his sister's house, where he lived with his sister and father, about 15 minutes from James's old home. After returning to his sister's house, he retrieved a gun and ammunition before committing the crime. Prosecutors alleged that the motive for the attack was a photo he had taken of Lamar at Amanda's house. Police searched James's cell phone and computer. They learned that at approximately 5:00 a.m., he began texting Amanda. He had tried to call her just 1 minute before the first gunshots and had called Amanda 22 times before that. Up until that point, Amanda had tried to avoid answering his calls, but after seeing the state of her house, she decided to pick up the phone. During the call, she accused James of robbing and vandalizing her house. Amanda had asked James to leave her alone. It was clear that she had done everything she could to avoid contact with James. She even suggested that she would keep quiet about his vandalizing her house if he would finally leave her life. The defense team is determined to fight the charges. They argue that James was prescribed medication to treat anxiety and depression, which was supposed to help him, but when taken together, caused unpredictable side effects. This reaction was made worse the night before the attack, especially after he had consumed beer and strong drinks. On the evening of August 26th, after returning home, he took another medication that was supposed to help him sleep. He fell asleep but woke up a few hours later. The defense argued that the combination of the drugs he had taken and the alcohol had contributed to his uncontrollable behavior. However, James had plenty of time before the incident. The effects of these substances should have diminished, and he even attended the trial that morning without arousing any suspicion. After leaving the courthouse, he began calling and texting Amanda. Before arriving at his wife's house, he filled up his car with gas. The prosecutor's office believes this is a sign that he was preparing to flee the state, suggesting that he had planned ahead. During a search of the car, police found a shotgun, 2 handguns, and a large amount of ammunition of various calibers. These items were scattered throughout the vehicle, indicating that they had been hastily discarded. Police also found the same drugs that the defense had mentioned. The attorneys prepared expert witnesses in pharmacology and psychiatry to demonstrate that the combination of drugs James was taking could impair his ability to think rationally and make decisions. According to the attorneys, this impairment ruled out premeditated culpability, suggesting that James's actions could have been a spontaneous outburst of aggression beyond his control. The pharmacologist stated that the combination of these drugs was likely to cause amnesia. Therefore, James may not actually remember the incident. During police questioning, Mike provided detailed evidence of James coming to his house that morning. James was a bit strange. Mike knew that James was trying to cope with Amanda's new relationship after their divorce. Mike could not understand why James still wanted to possess her even though they were divorced. James became obsessed and sent pictures of Amanda's new boyfriend to her, which led to a tragic outcome. Police carefully examined text messages exchanged between James and Mike. It appeared that Mike was telling the truth. James harbored resentment, not only toward his ex-wife, but also toward her friends. He specifically blamed Amanda's best friend, Lindy, for turning Amanda against him, which fueled his hatred for her. Evidence showed that James had collected a weapon just before leaving the house, the prosecutor's office said. Police also noted that James' father had tried to intervene and stop him from doing so, but his efforts were unsuccessful. The key witness for the defense was James' sister, Rhonda, who lived with him at the time. However, she was on vacation in Italy during the attack and returned 2 weeks later. Rhonda disputed the prosecutor's assertion that James was planning the attack. She believed that the 2 guns found in the car were there by chance, as she had been carrying them for a while. The defense argued that this indicated the attack was impulsive and unintentional. In contrast, the prosecution thought Rhonda was merely trying to defend younger brother, with whom she had always had a close relationship. The prosecution pointed out inconsistencies in Rhonda's testimony, especially regarding the type of handgun she reported having in the car. This raised the jury's suspicions. James faced the possibility of the death penalty for the assault. James's defense team aimed to reduce the severity of the sentence. The only sure way to spare James's life was to contest the premeditated murder charges, which could have carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. However, the prosecution was determined not to negotiate and refused to offer a plea deal. They argued that James, who had taken 2 lives and seriously injured 2 others, deserved the death penalty. The defense argued that James had no intention of harming Amanda or her friends. However, when he arrived at Amanda's home, an incident occurred that angered him. It is believed that there was an argument between the men, which may have caused James to start shooting. However, surviving witnesses, Rachel and Lamar, claimed that no conversation occurred and that no one provoked him. On the other hand, the prosecution argued strongly that James did not arrive at the home by accident. Instead, he returned to his sister's home to get weapons and ammunition for the murder, suggesting that his actions were premeditated. The key piece of evidence in the case was a phone call between James and Amanda that took place shortly before the shooting began. This call was played to the jury in court and lasted 14 minutes. During the conversation, Amanda attempted to end her relationship with James. She cried and begged him, trying to intimidate him by mentioning the restraining order and threatening to call the police if he continued to stalk her. It was clear that she had been enduring his harassment for a long time, but he paid no attention to her suffering. After both sides presented their arguments, the jury began deliberating their verdict. 2 hours later, they reached a unanimous decision, finding James Terry Callie, 38, guilty on all 7 counts, including burglary. However, the case was not over. 2 weeks later, the same jury reconvened to decide whether James should receive the death penalty. The defense team remained hopeful. They wanted to prove that the combination of drugs he had been taking could have caused side effects such as memory loss. Experts, including a forensic psychiatrist and a pharmacist, supported this claim, arguing that James suffered from parasomnias, which meant he could not have been aware and could not remember the events that had occurred. Psychiatrists claim that people with parasomnias can walk, drive, and perform deliberate actions. However, the prosecutor's office has disputed these claims by presenting court records showing that James had been in court the morning before the attack. He had interacted with several people and there was no unusual behavior. James appeared calm, with no signs of slowing down, confusion, or depression, common signs of people with parasomnias. The prosecution successfully convinced the jury of James's guilt for causing the deaths of Amanda and Lindy. The jury unanimously decided that he should receive the death penalty. A third hearing then took place where the court gave the defense one last chance to present any compelling evidence that might lead to a reduction in the death sentence. During this hearing, James took the stand for himself for the first time, describing the incident as a terrible accident. However, his argument lacked credibility. The defense attorneys also failed to present any substantial evidence, leading to James Terry Callie's death sentence being upheld. He is currently in prison awaiting execution by lethal injection. Giovanni Maria Versace was born on December 2nd, 1946 in Italy. He grew up with his brother, Santo, sister, Donatella, and his parents, Francesca and Antonio. He and his siblings were particularly close, made even more so when they tragically lost their older sister, Tina. Gianni adored his mother. She was a talented dressmaker, and he became immersed in her creative world from a young age. He made his first dress aged just 9 years old, a striking blue one-shoulder gown. He didn't know it at the time, but this very dress would be worn by Diana, the Princess of Wales, 40 years later. He worked as an apprentice in his mother's sewing business and threw himself into the world of design, color, and art. He was heavily influenced by Greek history and mythology, as well as artists like Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein. His ideas about fashion were unique and filled with bold prints and exciting statements. Age 26, he moved to one of the fashion capitals of the world, Milan, to work in design and immerse himself in fashion. He became the designer for several well-established fashion houses. People loved his work and creative flair, and he was encouraged to work on his own collections for women. He presented these at the Palazzo della Permanente Art Museum and put together his first fashion show just months later. In 1978, he opened up his first boutique at the age of 32, and the sky was the limit for him. After this, he began building the empire that would ultimately become the internationally recognized Versace fashion brand. His brother Santo became president of the company, with his younger sister Donatella acting as vice president. The famous Versace logo depicting Medusa's head came from the floors of some of the ruins that Gianni and his siblings used to play in as children. It was an ambitious family-run fashion business, with Gianni firmly at the helm and having full creative control of the company. By 1982, Versace was working on more than clothes. Jewelry, handbags and purses, and homeware textiles, the brand was now rapidly expanding. It was in this year he met model Antonio D'Amico. The spark was instant, and they started a relationship which would last 15 years. Gianni understood the power of celebrity and loved to use famous faces as walking adverts for his designs. He was friends with people such as Diana, Princess of Wales, Eric Clapton, Madonna, and Michael Hutchence, to name a few. He is credited as having discovered models like Naomi Campbell and Linda Evangelista, consistently working with them on ad campaigns as well as on the runway. He adored theater and spent a lot of his career making costumes for various performers and shows, working with everything from operas and ballets to clothing for music videos. Gianni embraced all aspects of fashion and never limited himself to any one area. He designed clothing for Michael Jackson and Paul McCartney's 1983 hit song Say, 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 and worked with Elton John to create the costumes for his 1992 world tour. He was recognized as being someone who brought together the worlds of fashion and music in a whole new way. On October 21, 1990, Gianni was working in San Francisco, having designed some costumes for the opera, when he bumped into a man named Andrew Cunanan, whom Gianni seemed to recognize from somewhere. The exact events of this meeting remain unclear, but witnesses claim there was a definite encounter between the pair. His sister Donatella disputes this and denies they ever met. What was certain is that Cunanan developed a dangerous obsession with the fashion designer, one which would ultimately lead to the death of Gianni Versace. In 1993, Versace was diagnosed with a rare form of ear cancer. While he battled the cancer successfully, it had taken a physical toll, and he started to delegate some of the business responsibilities. Despite this, in the mid-90s, he was still at the top of his career. Iconic Versace designs such as Elizabeth Hurley's safety pin dress, Princess Diana's purple gala gown, and Naomi Campbell's Andy Warhol pop art statement piece put the Versace brand at the top of the fashion industry. Gianni purchased a villa for just under $3 million, and a year later, he bought the adjoining hotel to extend the sprawling property. 6 a.m., a hot summer's day on July 15, 1997. Always the early riser, Gianni woke up to begin his day. He made several business calls to Milan, then set off on a morning walk around Miami Beach. Usually surrounded by a large entourage, on this particular day, he walked alone. He made a stop to buy some papers and a copy of Vogue and grabbed a takeout coffee. Around 8:45 a.m., he was back home and was looking for his house keys in his pocket when a dark-haired man in shorts and a baseball cap came rushing up to him. A single shot was fired, and Gianni Versace fell on the steps of his home. A second shot was fired at him as he lay on the floor, and the shooter quickly ran away from the scene, being chased by one of Gianni's neighbors. But the shooter was fast, and he sped off into the busy morning rush of Miami Beach. The ambulance quickly arrived, and he was rushed to the Jackson Memorial Hospital. But tragically, just after 9:20 a.m., Gianni Versace was pronounced dead. A manhunt was now on for the shooter, and it didn't take long for the police to identify him. It was Andrew Cunanan, a man the FBI had actually been searching for months already. Cunanan was a serial killer who adopted different looks and names to carry out a string of brutal murders across a 3-month period. He had moved to the Miami Beach area a couple of months before, with his next victim in mind. Cunanan was noted as being a prolific and compulsive liar throughout his life, forever exaggerating events and fabricating stories. His childhood was undoubtedly troubled, and it is thought that he had undiagnosed personality disorders. In 1988, when Cunanan was 19, his stockbroker father abandoned the family and moved to the Philippines to avoid being arrested for embezzlement. That same year, his mother, who was deeply religious, discovered Cunanan was gay, and this sparked a terrible argument in which he threw his mother against the wall, dislocating her shoulder. Cunanan was obsessed with living a lavish lifestyle and began dating wealthy older men to help fund his dreams. He was also dealing opioids and cocaine, as well as abusing painkillers, methamphetamine, and alcohol himself. He never settled in any one place and often upped and left, creating a new identity as he did so. He had huge financial troubles with large amounts of debt across multiple credit cards, and he used his relationships with wealthy men as a way of supporting himself and the upkeep of his fake lifestyle. His first victim was 28-year-old Jeffrey Trail, whom he murdered in Minneapolis in April of 1997. Trail and Cunanan briefly dated, and when an argument with Trail ensued, Cunanan stole his gun and took it to an apartment belonging to David Madsen. David Madsen was also an ex-lover, and Cunanan became jealous and paranoid over Madsen and Trail's friendship. Cunanan phoned Jeffrey Trail from Madsen's apartment, telling him he had his gun. When Trail arrived, Cunanan beat Trail to death with a hammer in front of David Madsen and then fled with Madsen across the state. Just 2 days later, co-workers found Trail's body rolled up in a rug behind the sofa. A duffel bag nearby gave police their first lead. On May 2nd, witnesses saw Madsen and Cunanan eating lunch together just north of Minneapolis. David Madsen's body was discovered a day later near a lake in Rush City, Minnesota. He had been shot with the gun Cunanan had stolen from Jeffrey Trail. Although police initially suspected that David Madsen may have been involved with the murder of Jeffrey Trail, it became obvious that he was being held hostage by Cunanan. Just a day later, and after fleeing to Illinois, he found his third victim, 72-year-old real estate tycoon Lee Miglin. It remains unclear how they met, but police don't believe it was a random attack. Cunanan bound Miglin's hands and feet and wrapped his head with duct tape. He proceeded to stab him more than 20 times with a screwdriver, as well as slitting his throat with a hacksaw. He then stole his green Lexus LS sedan and took off. When police realized that Miglin's car had been stolen, they also found David Madsen's red Jeep parked on the same street. The Jeep had a car phone inside, and using evidence from the phone, they began to piece together a timeline of events and locations. Cunanan had also been picked up on CCTV with David Madsen as they left the apartment building where Jeffrey Trail had died, and police knew that this was their only suspect. In New Jersey on May 9th, Cunanan shot dead a cemetery caretaker, William Rees. A kind and loving family man who was dedicated to his job, Rees was killed completely at random. Police speculated that he was shot purely because Cunanan wanted to steal his red Chevrolet pickup truck. When police arrived on scene, they noted that the same gun had been used, and they knew instantly it was Cunanan. On May 12th, he checked into the Normandy Plaza Hotel in Miami Beach, paying a month in advance in cash. Living in Miami until July, he remained undetected and unnoticed. With the police having no luck in locating him, Andrew Cunanan was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. He had killed 4 people in 12 days, and there seemed no end to his rampage. Posters of his many looks and names were printed and put up everywhere. Cunanan was so confident he wouldn't get caught. He pawned a gold chain he had stolen from one of his victims in a nearby shop. He filled out the form with his real name and current address, even showing his ID and leaving a thumbprint on the document. As required by law, a copy of this document was given to the police. But for whatever reason, nobody picked up on this, and his name quite literally went to the bottom of the pile. On July 14th, Cunanan left the hotel. He spent a night on the town visiting local bars and even told someone on the dance floor that he was a serial killer, playing it off as a joke. Early morning July 15th, he headed to Gianni Versace's residence, armed with the same gun he had stolen, and waited for the fashion icon to emerge. He fled to hide out on a houseboat about 2 miles away from Gianni's house. When the police discovered William Ree's truck in a parking garage near Versace's house, it was filled with Cunanan's clothes and newspaper articles of the murders he had committed. It was clear that he relished the notoriety. Police suspected he was in the houseboat for several days. Cunanan knew the police were closing in on him, and he was now the most wanted man in America. Over 1,000 agents were looking for him, and it was one of the biggest manhunts in history. On July 23rd, a caretaker stopped by to check up on the empty houseboat. Not knowing this was the boat concealing the fugitive. When he found him inside, he ran and phoned the police immediately. He heard a gunshot from inside and reported to police that he had found Cunanan and a shot had been fired. A SWAT team responded within minutes and waited outside, watching the boat for almost 2 hours. The media were out in force as well, filming the events live as they unfolded. There was no reaction from Cunanan, so the SWAT team threw tear gas onto the boat and stormed it. They found Cunanan's body on the bed upstairs in the master bedroom. He had shot himself. He left no suicide note and no explanation for anything he had done. Andrew Cunanan's rampage was a vicious and brutal one, and the residents of Miami breathed a sigh of relief when it was all over. Cunanan left a trail of destruction behind him, and the police will never know the full extent of the events that took place over the previous months, possibly even dating back earlier. His father Modesto was eventually tracked down to his hideout in the Philippines but had nothing to say. Around 2,000 people attended Gianni's memorial in Milan, and the number of lives he had touched with his talents and warm personality was clear for all to see. Some of his stores dressed their mannequins in black to mourn his passing, and Versace's work was honored by a posthumous exhibit at the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. From his humble beginnings, Versace created a fashion empire. It is now one of the most recognized names in the world. Capri Holdings, formerly known as Michael Kors Holdings Limited, acquired the Versace brand in 2018 for just over $2 billion. Donatella and Santo Versace are still heavily involved in the company, with Donatella as artistic director and Santo as chairman and president. The CEO is now Jonathan Ackroyd. Gianni Versace was a gifted and creative visionary who changed the course of fashion and design. He argued against the fashion norms and carved out a new path for designers to follow for years to come. His work was undoubtedly iconic. His place in history can never be overlooked, and he will surely never be forgotten. The case of Valyria Vivano. On May 29, 1996 in Chile, Miguel and Jacqueline Vivano welcomed their third child, a daughter named Valyria. She had 2 older brothers, Daniel and Michelangelo. The family lived a modest life, supported mainly by Miguel's job at a transport company, while Jacqueline looked after the home and children. Valyria stood out from an early age for her courage and caring nature. In February 2014, Valyria's family went through a breakup when her parents decided to divorce. Despite this, they remained close to their children, especially their youngest daughter, Valyria. Her strong desire to help others and her courage inspired her to choose a career that suited her. After graduating from high school, she enrolled in the police academy and graduated in February 2016. The following year, she started working at the Metropolitan Homicide Bureau. Valyria was passionate about her work and dedicated herself to serving, always ready to serve. Her courage and dedication earned her the respect of her colleagues, and she was recognized for successfully solving many cases. Notably, on July 21, 2020, She prevented a robbery at a jewelry store and helped take down 2 dangerous criminals. At that time, Valyria lived with her brother and mother in Kikura Township, where she worked as an assistant inspector. In February 2021, Valyria was preparing to celebrate her 25th birthday, and on May 29th, her mother threw a big party at her home to mark the occasion. All of Valyria's relatives, friends, and colleagues attended, except for her father, who was not present at the celebration. The following morning in Santa Tomas de la Pina, a search operation began to monitor all traffic entering and leaving the town. This was prompted by the murder of a 20-year-old woman, making it crucial to locate the killer. Information suggested that he might have fled in a Kia. A team consisting of Valyria, Deputy Police Officer Pony, Inspector Marie Jura, and Detective Leonel Canales tracked the suspect's movements. Police Officer Felipe Era, in a patrol car, skillfully blocked the suspect's path. Valyria and Leonel stepped out of their car when suddenly a shot rang out, hitting Valyria. Despite immediate medical attention and resuscitation efforts at the hospital, Valyria died 2 hours later. Her colleagues informed her family of the tragedy when they arrived at the hospital. The area where the incident occurred was cordoned off, and outsiders were asked to leave. Police were monitoring the scene and arrested 2 suspects, Miguel Colobra, 19, and his 17-year-old accomplice, who cannot be named due to their age. Valyria's funeral was held in a solemn manner at her workplace. A procession led by her colleagues carried her coffin from the police station to the cemetery. Crowds gathered to say goodbye as the hearse drove away. High-ranking officials attended, including Interior Minister Rodrigo Delgado and Deputy Minister Juan Francisco Gali. A 3-day mourning period was declared at both the police station where Valyria worked and the academy where she studied. Hector Espinoza, head of the Homicide Investigation Department, presented a Chilean flag to Valyria's parents, who displayed it in their home alongside a photo of their daughter. Valyria's death shocked the nation and led to a murder investigation. Police focused on 2 suspects who were tried in June 2021. During the trial, it emerged that Valyria was not wearing a bulletproof vest that morning and was driving an unmarked car, which made her vulnerable. The attackers shot at Valyria while trying to flee. After the trial, the main suspects were detained for 6 months as the investigation continued. In August 2021, when 3 police officers were suddenly fired, concerns arose about their possible involvement in Valyria's death. On August 2nd, at the request of the district attorney, Valyria's parents attended a meeting where Inspector Juan Carlos Scara publicly apologized to them on behalf of the police. Valyria was killed by a bullet from a colleague's pistol, causing outrage among Valyria's family. On August 4th, representatives of the prosecutor's office revealed the findings of the Homicide Investigation Unit. They indicated that a bullet was fired from the police pistol. The 3 police officers who accompanied Valyria that morning may have been involved in her death. In fact, about 2 to 3 hours after Valyria's death, the police arrested 2 suspects, Miguel Colobra and his 17-year-old accomplice. Miguel admitted to his relatives that he did not shoot Valyria. His mother even filed a statement with the prosecutor's office declaring her son innocent and asking for verification of the facts. On July 29, 2021, the prosecutor received a report from the forensic laboratory. This report revealed that the pistol and bullets that killed Valyria belonged to her associates in that operation. Additionally, on June 17th, experts from the Bureau launched an investigation into 3 police officers who were present with Valyria at the time. Police officer Jose Guerra reported that gunpowder residue was found on Leonel Contreras' hands. This information reached department management but was not used in the investigation for unclear reasons. With these findings, the prosecutor's office filed an administrative lawsuit against 3 of Valyria's colleagues. They were subsequently suspended from the police force on August 9th. The 3 police officers and 2 detained suspects were present at trial. Valyria's relatives were also invited. Felipe Era spoke first, explaining that just before the gunshots, he was in a position where he saw Valyria. She was the first to get out of the car but turned back to get her keys and weapon. At that moment, a shot rang out, and the criminal's car sped away while Valyria lay on the ground. Then Maria spoke up. The entire group got out of the patrol car. Maria herself reached the corner and heard gunshots. She turned around and saw Valyria lying on the ground. Lionel also spoke up, saying that he got out of the car from the back seat. Valyria, who was in the front passenger seat, walked diagonally toward the suspects. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out and Valyria fell. By evening, the reenactment was complete. The police reported that all the evidence pointed directly to Lionel. On August 10th, Miguel Calobra and his 17-year-old friend, who were wrongly accused of Valyria's murder, were released on 2 conditions. They had to sign a written agreement not to leave the city and had to report to police monthly to prove they were abiding by the law. Lionel's lawyer, who disagreed with the investigation's findings, argued that his client was in a difficult position to fire the shot at that time. The current situation has sparked widespread anger in society, leading Valyria's family to hold rallies demanding justice and the arrest of the real killer. Alfredo Morgado, the lawyer for Valyria's family, highlighted the police's behavior in the reconstruction of the events. The 3 police claimed that they did not use weapons that morning, but the head of the police department, Saoirse Munoz, denied this claim. Furthermore, 3 police officers involved in the operation repeatedly contradicted their testimony. The parents of those detained also spoke out, accusing the police of trying to frame their children for Valyria's murder. They alleged that their children were beaten while in custody and that there was evidence to support these allegations of mistreatment. In October 2021, police officers from Valyria's workplace invited her parents to the department. There, they were presented with a document to sign that would grant them an increased pension. The police portrayed Valyria as a hero who had died in a special operation, which had helped her parents gain more benefits. However, this was seen as a further insult to Valyria's family. The police seemed to want to stop any potential complaints from her parents, but this only angered them more. From that point on, the family no longer trusted any information about Valyria's death. Lionel was arrested on a warrant from the prosecutor's office and taken to a temporary detention center. The first trial took place in early November. The prosecutor presented a report and autopsy results that showed that Lionel was the shooter that morning. While trying to stop Valyria's bleeding, Lionel attempted to hide his pistol. Lionel's defense argued that he did not see the shooter and believed he was also injured. They claimed that Lionel could not have fired the shot due to the position he was standing in and the trajectory of the bullet that hit Valyria. The prosecution argued that Lionel had planned to kill his co-worker Valyria, claiming it was intentional and not an accident. The judge deemed Lionel a threat to society and ordered him to be held for 6 months until his next hearing. Meanwhile, Valyria's family was satisfied with Lionel's detention but had lost faith in the police. So Valyria's family chose to conduct their own investigation. Daniel and Michelangelo reviewed the case for new evidence and traveled to Santo Tomas to search for surveillance cameras that might reveal footage of the real shooter. At the same time, Lionel's lawyers also conducted their own investigation. On January 7, 2022, it was suggested that Felipe Era was the most likely suspect in Valyria's death. That morning, Felipe was in a patrol car, and he opened fire while he was in the driver's seat. His pistol was identical to the one used by the police officers. In addition, Felipe washed his hands thoroughly before the gunpowder residue analysis and later gave inconsistent testimony. He initially claimed that he heard a gunshot and saw Valyria fall, saying that he came to her aid. He later changed his testimony, saying that he heard a gunshot and saw Lionel helping Valyria. During his reenactment of the event, Felipe claimed that Valyria had returned to the car to get her gun and keys to chase the criminals. Over the next few months, he continued to change his story, remaining vague on the details. The details the lawyer provided could undermine any investigative efforts by the prosecutor's office. Valyria's family expressed doubts about the competence of the police, and the idea that Felipe could have committed the crime began to seem plausible. Evidence gathered by Michelangelo and Daniel supported this theory. The judge soon considered the reports. However, Felipe Era was listed as a witness in the case, although he had also been dismissed from the police, while Lionel remained the sole defendant. In July 2022, the court extended Lionel's detention. Shortly thereafter, in a second hearing, The defense continued to insist that Felipe Era was the killer, while the prosecution focused on Leonel Contreras. Valyria's family and their lawyers launched their own investigation, leading prosecutors to request that the investigation be continued and new evidence be added to the case. Meanwhile, the prosecutor called Felipe Era to testify. He claimed that he had not washed his hands before analyzing the gunpowder residue and that Valyria's blood was on his fingers and sleeve when he assisted her. He also claimed that he had kept the gun with him since 2018 and had never exchanged the weapon with anyone. The trial is set to begin in March 2023, and prosecutors are asking for a minimum sentence of 15 years in prison for Leonel. Although Leonel is prohibited from speaking to the press, he violated this rule in May by inviting media representatives to his pretrial detention facility. He has publicly proclaimed his innocence, claiming that Felipe Era shot Valyria in the back. A preliminary hearing was held on May 16, 2023, but did not result in any significant changes in the case. Leonel was cautioned for speaking to journalists. The next hearing was held on September 2nd. The prosecutor's office maintained its position. The prosecutor presented the following points. The patrol car driver prevented the criminals from escaping. At that time, 3 policemen got out of the car to persuade the criminals to surrender. Leonel used a weapon without a valid reason. The defense attorneys aimed to acquit Leonel based on a key argument. The prosecution lacked clear evidence proving that Leonel was the shooter. They claimed that the gun and gunpowder fell into his hands purely by accident when he was trying to assist Valyria. The court carefully considered the arguments from both sides and reached its decision on November 17th. Leonel Contreras was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Valyria's relatives were disappointed with the outcome and believed the sentence was lenient compared to the crime he committed. While Leonel faces punishment, Valyria's family still has many unanswered questions, such as the motive behind the crime and why the prosecutor's office did not investigate these motives. One of the city squares has been named in honor of Valyria Vivano. Every year on the anniversary of her death, a memorial event is held where flowers are laid in her memory. The crime has highlighted widespread corruption in the police force, leading to the dismissal of 16 officers from the investigative agency. Valyria's family believes that she solved challenging cases that made her a burden to many, including those in the police department. She died tragically under mysterious circumstances, and the reasons behind her death may never be revealed. Even if her family uncovers new evidence, it is unlikely that the investigation will be reopened or that there will be a trial. Comedy legend and Saturday Night Live star Philip Edward Hartman started life in Ontario, Canada. Born on September 24, 1948, he came from a big family and began using comedy as a way of getting attention. His family moved to the United States when he was 10 years old, and when Phil started school, he quickly became popular among his peers. Always joking and making people laugh, it was clear, although he didn't know it, that performing was in his future. He went to California State University and majored in graphic design, as well as undertaking a public speaking course. He loved the outdoor life and spent lots of time fishing and surfing. He was incredibly creative and went on to design several album covers for well-known bands. In the 1960s, he spent time on the road with many bands and artists. He was immersed in the rock and roll lifestyle, and this further fueled his creative spark. At the beginning of 1970, he met and married his first wife, Gretchen Lewis. However, the marriage quickly dissipated, and they divorced just 2 years later. Despite spending many years behind the scenes working with bands and designing album covers, he quickly fell into the spotlight when he began taking improvisation classes. In 1975, Phil Hartman watched an improv group called the Groundlings. When the group asked for a member of the audience to get involved, Phil said he knew instantly that this was something he had to be part of. He auditioned for and joined the famed improv comedy troupe shortly thereafter. The Groundlings helped birth the careers of stars such as Will Ferrell, Lisa Kudrow, Kathy Griffin, and Jimmy Fallon, among many others. Another notable star was Paul Reubens, famed for his character Pee Wee Herman. Phil Hartman helped develop this character with Reubens, as they were working on the Pee Wee Herman show for a long time until the pair parted ways after a falling out. After this, his career began to take off even more, and he was appearing in various pilots, films, and commercials. His second wife, Lisa Jarvis, said that while Phil's characters were part of himself, they were also like his armor. She said that although he was an entertainer, creative and passionate, at the same time, he was incredibly hard to reach emotionally and withdrew very quickly. A few years after their relationship ended in 1985, Phil met Bryn Omdahl on a blind date. Bryn, originally named Vicky Jo, was stunning and funny, and the chemistry between her and Phil was instant. After modeling for years in her hometown, Bryn made the journey to Los Angeles with the hope of being in show business. She was described as very ambitious and eager to prove herself. It was here that she changed her name from Vicky Jo to Bryn. Before Phil and Bryn met, she had also spent time in rehab for cocaine and quaalude abuse. Drugs were an ongoing problem, which would mark and impact their relationship throughout its time. Friends would say that when they were good, they were great, but the frequent arguments and volatility between the pair were clear for all to see. In 1986, Phil Hartman made an incredible leap in his career. He was asked to audition for Saturday Night Live. For comedians and comedic actors, SNL was where it was happening, and becoming a cast member was a highly sought-after and coveted job. Onlookers hung on his every word during his audition, and it came as no surprise when he was offered a spot. His impressions of people such as Bill Clinton and Frank Sinatra became iconic, and the audience and cast adored him. His good friend and fellow SNL writer Dana Kaufman described him as a generous and supportive performer who always wanted to make the rest of the cast look as good as possible. SNL put Phil Hartman and his amazing comedic capabilities firmly in the public eye, and he soon became a fan favorite. He won an Emmy for his contributions to the Saturday Night Live writing team. He was also nicknamed Glue by fellow performers for his ability to hold the show together and help out the other performers where needed. Despite their issues, Bryn and Phil married in 1987 and quickly became quite the Hollywood power couple. At the end of Phil Hartman's second season of Saturday Night Live, he and Bryn welcomed their first child, a son named Sean. Upon hearing the joyful news, Phil's ex-wife Lisa Jarvis sent a letter to the family offering to help look after the baby should they ever need it. She said she received an abusive death threat back from Bryn. Phil took to being a father quickly, and his baby boy Sean was his pride and joy. The family began splitting their time between New York and Los Angeles, and he and Bryn had a second baby, a little girl named Bergen. Phil and Bryn seemed to have it all, but friends of the star said it was clear that the cracks in the relationship were very apparent. People who knew the couple said that Phil didn't like confrontation and struggled to open up emotionally, whereas Bryn was very vocal but often chose the worst times to start the conversations. Bryn began to show up to the Saturday Night Live set more frequently, and cast and crew members often saw heated arguments between the two. During a table read-through for a new episode of the show, Bryn turned up to the set and began sitting on various men's laps and flirting with different people. Although Phil didn't seem to pay much attention in a bid to keep the peace, the other cast members were left feeling uncomfortable. People felt this was an attempt by Bryn to get attention from Phil, as she was feeling lonely and insecure in the marriage. As well as prescription drugs, Bryn had relapsed and started drinking and using cocaine again. Although this was noticed by members of the SNL cast, it wasn't uncommon at the time. Alcohol and drugs were a frequent feature among many a dressing room, with some stars as famous for their drug-taking as their comedy. Friends also said that Bryn had become resentful of Phil's career and wanted her own shot at being in the limelight. Phil argued that he was the breadwinner for the family and everything he did was for them. Phil also told friends that he would often have to restrain Bryn when she became physical during fights. As well as his work on SNL, Phil accepted various roles on The Simpsons, further cementing his place in pop culture. In 1995, after 8 seasons on Saturday Night Live, Phil Hartman decided to step away from the show. He is still regarded as one of the finest comedic talents to ever appear on SNL, and fellow cast and crew members said there was a definite void when he left. He was working hard on a pilot for his show entitled The Phil Show, in which he would make sure Bryn got a leading role. However, the pilot never made it to air, and Bryn was reportedly devastated at not being able to work with her husband on this project. Instead, Phil signed up to be part of a new sitcom called News Radio, working alongside many famous faces. He was earning around $50,000 an episode and was at the height of his career. He, Bryn, and their 2 children moved permanently to a $1,400,000 mansion in Encino, California, for Phil to focus on the sitcom and his family. Despite his professional accolades, he couldn't escape his personal turmoil in his marriage, and the explosive arguments continued. On Mother's Day 1997, Bryn came home late, reportedly drunk and high on cocaine. Phil was horrified and said if this behavior continued, he would have to divorce her and take the children. He said if she didn't check into rehab, the marriage was over. Bryn checked into rehab in Arizona the following day but left after less than a week, claiming she didn't need to be there. After a 4th season of News Radio was commissioned, Phil decided to take a summer break to spend more time with his family and work on his marriage. Phil and Bryn Hartman also reached their 11-year anniversary on May 27, 1998. Despite their marital issues, they always aimed to have a weekly date night while their children spent time with a nanny. On May 27th, their day began with the couple talking about what they would do for their weekly date. According to sources, Phil had gotten his days confused and forgotten about the date night, which sparked yet another argument. Phil left the family home to go shopping and get some space, and Bryn decided she was going to head out too. Leaving the children with the nanny, she started getting ready for an evening out with a friend. Sometime around 7:30 p.m., Bryn Hartman went to meet her friend Christine Zander for dinner and drinks, telling the nanny she would be home to see the children off to bed. Christine Zander was a producer and writer, and friends of Bryn speculated she may have been hoping for Christine to create a part for her in an upcoming project. Her friend Christine said she did seem in good spirits and in a positive frame of mind. Around 9:30 p.m., Phil arrived at home and let the nanny go. He put the children to bed and headed to bed himself. Around 9:45, Bryn asked Christine if she wanted to carry on drinking in another bar, but Christine couldn't stay out any later. While Christine went to the bathroom, she said that Bryn made a phone call, which she was worried may have been to score drugs. They said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. At 10:15 p.m., Bryn drove across town to Studio City to go to her friend and ex-lover Ron Douglas's house. They drank beer and caught up, with Bryn attempting to briefly call Phil, but he didn't pick up the phone. Just before midnight, Ron told Bryn that it was best for her to head home, as he didn't want any issues with Phil. When Bryn arrived home at around 1 a.m., she began using cocaine. Although what happened next is speculation, it is understood that she and Phil would have argued. Phil didn't want to fight and decided to go back to sleep, leaving Bryn to her own devices. Sometime before 3 a.m., Bryn, already intoxicated, snorted another line of cocaine and grabbed one of Hartman's many guns. She entered the bedroom and shot her husband 3 times as he slept, between the eyes, in the throat, and in his chest. Their 9-year-old son Sean woke up to what he thought was a door slamming, and he heard his mother crying. Heavily intoxicated, manic, and in a state of shock, Bryn got in her car and drove to see her friend Ron Douglas. She was frantic and immediately confessed to killing Phil. However, due to Bryn's often erratic nature, Ron didn't initially believe her. It was clear that she was in a drug-induced state, and he assumed that they had simply had another argument. He attempted to sober her up, and at around 6 a.m., Ron was fairly satisfied that she was able to drive. But Bryn wanted Ron to go back to the house with her. Ron said that while they were talking, a gun fell out of Bryn's purse, and he immediately knew he had to follow her car back to the house. Upon entering the bedroom, Ron saw Phil Hartman. It was clear that nothing could be done, and he was already deceased. Ron Douglas phoned 911. "I think there's a shooting here. You're gonna send the police out there. Okay? Okay." During this time, Bryn barricaded herself in the bedroom with Phil's body. She phoned her sister and asked her to take care of Sean and Bergen. At 6:20 a.m., the police surrounded Hartman's home. They found a visibly distressed Sean at the front of the house. Hearing the police encroaching, Bryn lay next to her husband and shot herself. As the story began to break, the world was in a state of shock. In the days and weeks following the devastating event, many theories began to circulate. One of which was that there was an affair going on between Ron Douglas and Bryn Hartman, which culminated in a crime of passion. Another theory was that Bryn was hoping to attempt to frame Ron for the murder, and that's why she drove to his house with the gun. No theory has ever been proven. Ron Douglas flatly denied any involvement and said that until he got to the house, he had no idea what had happened. It will never be known what was going on inside the mind of Bryn Hartman in the early hours of May 28th. As well as a high level of cocaine, the antidepressant Zoloft was in Bryn's system, and her blood alcohol level was 0.12%, well above the legal limit. Bryn had told friends that she had been prescribed Zoloft by her children's doctor, but that it made her feel strange and out of her own body. Medical examiners looked into the side effects of Zoloft and whether this could have altered her state of mind that night. As well as disorientation and hallucinations, it can occasionally bring on suicidal feelings. Many of Bryn's family members believe this drug could have played a key role in the events that took place that fateful night. In 1999, the Hartman estate filed a lawsuit against Pfizer, the pharmaceutical company that produces the drug Zoloft, claiming there were few warnings about the side effects and the danger of mixing the drug with alcohol. The family did receive an out-of-court settlement from Pfizer before it ever went to court. However, the theory surrounding the impact of Zoloft remains an uncertain area, as levels of the drug in Bryn's system were low according to the toxicology report. In the early hours of May 28, 1998, 2 young children lost their parents, family and friends lost their loved ones, and the world felt the loss of an incredible talent. Sean and Bergen Hartman went to live with their aunt and uncle in Wisconsin and were raised under a different name to shield them from the public eye. Sean took after his father and is an artist and musician, carving a creative career for himself. Bergen has degrees in journalism and communication from university and has her own business. She even made a special appearance on SNL's 40th anniversary celebration in 2015 to honor her father. Both children dedicated a memorial to their parents in Greenwood Cemetery. The deaths of Phil and Bryn Hartman shocked the world. But Phil Hartman's amazing comedic talents continue to live on through the world of entertainment, his friends, family, and their children. The case of Ramsay Scrivo. In January 2014, Donna Scrivo lived in the charming town of St. Clair Shores, Michigan, with her eldest son, Ramsay. He grew up in an environment of strict control from his mother, which often led to problems. Ramsay, born in 1981, had a younger brother who both boys attended a Catholic school, and their parents had high aspirations for them. In 1999, Ramsay graduated from college and began working at an accounting firm. However, by the February, he was fired, which was the beginning of a series of job losses. Ramsay then tried to join the family business. It seemed like Ramsay had finally found his place and things were going well. Unfortunately, the family soon faced a tragedy when the father fell ill and passed away. On January 25, 2014, around 6:30 p.m., 32-year-old Ramsay left home, telling his mother he was going out for cigarettes. That was the last time she saw him alive. At first, no one suspected anything was wrong. He was an adult who could go out with friends or visit places on his own. So no alarm was raised immediately. However, the next morning, Donna realized Ramsay hadn't returned home. When he didn't answer her calls, she began to worry. After waiting another day without any news on January 27th, she decided to report his disappearance to the police. After filing the report, Donna continued to call Ramsay's mobile phone, becoming increasingly anxious with each attempt. The cold weather added to her worry. If Ramsay was indeed missing, he could be at risk of freezing if he were outside. It was crucial to act quickly. Soon after, a police officer reached out to Ramsay's family. Donna explained that Ramsay was dealing with issues related to an attack on a friend at a bar. She also expressed concern about Ramsay's struggles with illegal substances, alcohol, and mental health, which required him to undergo regular drug and alcohol testing. The police became concerned about Ramsay's disappearance, suspecting he might have run into trouble again. Donna explained that her son had left to buy cigarettes and didn't have any plans for the night. She noted that he took a wallet containing 2 credit cards and a driver's license with him. To trace Ramsay's whereabouts, the officer decided to review the card transactions. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that Ramsay had not made any purchases that evening, casting doubt on whether he had reached the store at all. This prompted police to track Ramsay's mobile phone. They soon found it on a neighbor's property. When they examined the scene, the police retrieved the phone, but the neighbor was unaware of how it had ended up in his yard or what had happened to Ramsay. The investigation revealed that the Ramsay's mobile phone was checked, and it showed no record of the calls that Donna claimed to have made before and after her son's disappearance. This contradiction raised additional suspicions with the police, leading them to question the validity of the call records. Police then approached neighbors to gather more information about Ramsay and his mother. This investigation revealed that neighbors had not seen Ramsay for several days, which contradicted his mother's claims. Another disturbing detail noted by neighbors was the strong smell of cleaning products coming from Ramsay's home, which was detected the day before Donna reported Ramsay missing. Based on their experience, they found these signs very suspicious. There seemed to be some unusual elements surrounding the Ramsay family. Donna Scrivo, born in 1954 in Dallas, Texas, dreamed of becoming a nurse since she was a child. Her dream came true when she met Donnell in August 1971. They got married, and 2 months later, their eldest son, Ramsay, was born. The family then moved to Donna's house in Michigan City, SN Clear Shores, where their youngest son was later born. They lived a modest life and maintained good relationships with their relatives and neighbors for many years. The family's first major challenge arose in 2003 when Donna suffered a heart attack. Remarkably, she survived the surgery, but her health began to decline afterwards. She became forgetful and anxious, ultimately having to leave her job as a nurse. Nevertheless, she had pursued her passion for nursing for 12 years before these events unfolded. Donna grew increasingly concerned that her son, Ramsay, was struggling with mental health issues. He was severely depressed and unable to manage his anger. They sought help at a psychiatric hospital, where he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. After that diagnosis, Donna became reluctant to let Ramsay go far from home, fearing he might endanger himself or others. This concern intensified because he refused to take the medication prescribed by his doctor, insisting he didn't want to experience certain side effects. Unfortunately, this decision hindered his ability to combat his illness, and his condition continued to deteriorate, with symptoms becoming more pronounced. Ramsay was convinced that someone was poisoning his food and drinks. He even believed a nanochip had been implanted in his tooth to track him. After getting into a fight, he suffered a serious head injury when he fell and hit the concrete. Following this incident, he experienced worsening symptoms. He became increasingly aggressive, and his alcohol abuse only intensified the situation. Eventually, he became a danger to himself and others, landing on probation after an altercation with a friend at a bar. His condition worsened when Ramsay's father, Neil, passed away. Neil was an important figure in Ramsay's life, as they developed a deep bond that resembled that of best friends. He was the only one who could control Ramsay's dangerous behavior. At that time, Ramsay was taking his medication consistently and his condition had stabilized. Neil had acted as a buffer between Ramsay's mental health struggles and his wife, who sought to control every aspect of their lives. When Neil died, tensions between Ramsay and his mother increased. Ramsay began using Marfan left over from his late father, and during this time, his mental decline became more apparent. Donna was concerned for her safety, so she sought hospitalization for her son at a psychiatric clinic, where he was later diagnosed with psychosis. While he was in the hospital, she also worked to establish legal guardianship over him. This allowed the doctors to manage his medication, leading to a quick improvement in Ramsay's condition. After he was discharged, he returned to live with Donna, but their relationship began to deteriorate over time. Eventually, a fire broke out in their home due to faulty wiring. The fire started in the basement where Ramsay was sleeping. Donna evacuated the house and called the fire department, but Ramsay was still in the room that was on fire. They were able to save him, but after investigating, the circumstances surrounding the fire raised suspicions. However, no evidence of premeditation was ever found. Ultimately, they could no longer live in the damaged house, which required significant repairs. So, they decided to rent a different house temporarily. Unfortunately, this only made things worse. Ramsay, who was 32 years old, was still under his mother's strict guardianship. She had formalized this guardianship through the court. However, by June 2014, Ramsay went to court to end the guardianship, which his mother had maintained for about 6 months. Life had taken a toll on Ramsay, and Donna's efforts to control everything ultimately led him to move out. By the time the tragedy occurred, Ramsay had been living independently for a while. Donna then went to Texas to visit relatives. She considered the possibility of returning to her hometown, possibly with her son. However, her son, Ramsay, went missing on January 27, 2014, and Donna reported Ramsay missing to the police. Days passed without any clues until January 30th, when a witness came forward. While driving along a snow-covered road in China Township, she noticed something dark on the side of the road. When she stopped to check, she discovered intestines scattered across a field, covered in blood. The sight shocked the girl. Nearby, she noticed a bag, and when she opened it, she discovered a human head inside. There were also other horrifying items. Terrified, she quickly called the police. When the police arrived, they were equally horrified by the discovery and immediately began searching the area. In addition to the head and intestines they later found the torso, but no other remains were found. Both the head and torso were mutilated, and the victim was unrecognizable. While the police were working to identify the body they had discovered, they received a tip from a local resident the very next morning. In one of the city's trash cans, several suspicious items were found packed in garbage bags, including burnt clothing and an ID card. At that point, the police had no idea who the victim was, and the items they found were in such poor condition due to fire damage that they could not read the documents. It was clear that the deceased was a man. But even before the lab tests could begin, reports of other disturbing discoveries began to emerge in the city. More human remains were found, along with a bloody electric saw and 4 blades used to dismember the victim. In a trash bin, there were also clothes and a Coca-Cola bottle. By this point, the forensic expert had completed the analysis and autopsy of the body, including collecting fingerprints for comparison with existing databases. Eventually, it was confirmed that the deceased was 32-year-old Ramsay Scrivo, whose disappearance had recently been reported by Donna. The cause of death was established as strangulation. Further blood tests reveal the dangerous level of antidepressants in Xanax in his system, 4 times higher than the prescribed dosage. This overdose could have contributed to his death, but police were already aware that his mother, Donna, had been directly overseeing his medication intake. The investigation into Ramsay's disappearance quickly shifted to a murder case. Police began interviewing his friends, acquaintances, and neighbors. A witness claimed to have seen a woman in an SUV tossing the bag away right in front of him, but he could not identify her or provide any detailed information, nor could he remember the car's license plate. However, police went to the location where the suspect was seen dumping trash. They found nearby surveillance cameras and requested the footage. After reviewing the recordings, they were able to get a clear image of the car and the woman driving it. The woman turned out to be Donna Scrivo, Ramsay's mother, who had transported her son's dismembered remains in her 1990 Chevrolet Bezier to the city dumpsters. The police were shocked by the unfolding events and found some of Donna's actions suspicious, but they did not initially believe she could have killed her son. Nevertheless, an arrest warrant was issued, and Donna was quickly taken into custody. She was brought to the police station for questioning. At first, Donna did not provide any useful information. She claimed to have mental health issues and that her son had taken one's own life. However, this was clearly a lie, as his body had been dismembered and she had taken steps to dispose of the remains. The police did not believe her story. They suspected that the conflict between Donna and Ramsay had escalated, causing her to lose control. As a result, Donna was charged as the prime suspect in the murder of her 32-year-old son, facing charges of first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. It was clear that she was trying to mislead the investigation. Police obtained search warrants for the Ramsay family's apartment and the Donna's car. When they first entered the apartment, they were hit by a strong smell of cleaning products that stung their eyes. It was clear that the Donna was attempting to clean the crime scene to eliminate evidence. However, despite her efforts, police discovered several blood droplets in the bathroom, as well as traces on the corridor wall, the porch, and the entrance railings. Notably, there were no cars in the parking lot. Interestingly, she was attempting to donate her car to a local charity in Detroit, and Donna had already managed to do the same with Ramsay's car. Nevertheless, the police tracked down both vehicles for inspection. In the Donna's car, they found numerous bloodstains, which were sent for analysis and confirmed to belong to Ramsay. Locals learned about the crime through news and social media and were all shocked by the incident. Gradually, more witnesses came forward to the police station to share their stories. During the investigation, police determined that Donna had purchased an electric saw and saw blade at a nearby hardware store on January 26th. The electric saw was eventually found in a trash bag along with Ramsay's remains. Next, Patricia, a neighbor, reported that she saw Donna carrying 3 black trash bags to her silver car. All of the neighbors were later present in court. The lawyer claimed that his client, Donna Scrivo, was insane and requested a psychiatric evaluation. However, the psychiatrists who assessed her determined that she was sane and fit to stand trial. The trial began in May 2015, and by then, she appeared before the jury, insisting on her innocence and pleading for her release. The prosecutor presented evidence that Donna had administered Xanax to the murder victim, with the dosage being 4 times higher than the recommended amount. Donna had received a 90-day supply of the drugs in early January, and less than 30 days later, during a police search of her apartment, only 1 pill remained in the package. This showed that Ramsay had taken the rest of the medication. The prosecution argued that this proved that Donna had intentionally given her son an increased dose, which was potentially dangerous. After Ramsay's death, his biological mother, Donna, made the decision to dispose of his body. In a horrific act, she dismembered him in her bathroom and placed the remains in garbage bags. To avoid being caught, she took out several bags each day, discarding them in different trash bins. However, she disagreed with the prosecution's testimony and decided to present her own testimony before the jury. According to Donna, on January 25th, a masked man broke into their apartment, likely intending to kill her son. At the time, she was in the basement doing laundry and did not hear anything unusual or see the intruder. When she came out of the basement, she found the front door open. Hearing noises from Ramsay's room, she went upstairs and discovered her son dead, tied up next to his bed, with a strong man with a menacing appearance standing nearby. The intruder did not harm her. Instead, he commanded her to dispose of the body. Feeling she had no choice, she complied. The criminal stayed with her for the next 5 days, closely watching her as she followed his orders. Donna reported that she cleaned the room and dealt with the remains under his watchful eye, and he only left after confirming that she had completed his instructions. During this time, Donna stated that she was handcuffed to a bed and that the intruder seldom let her go, even when there were things to do. Although she was confined, she claimed she didn't contact the police because she was scared, a claim many found unbelievable. This raised several questions about her story. Why did the supposed attacker not kill her? Why did he stay in her home for 5 days while controlling her? Critics questioned why she didn't try to escape when the intruder was distracted, leading some to speculate that he might not have been real or that her story was made up. As the trial progressed, the jury had to decide whether Donna's fears were genuine or if she was fabricating her story after her arrest. Throughout the lengthy legal process, she frequently mentioned the mysterious masked man who allegedly held her captive, despite the increasing evidence against her. The investigation ultimately did not find any DNA or direct links to a possible criminal regarding her son's remains, nor was there any of her blood or fingerprints on the dismembered body. Donna's defense team worked hard to prove her innocent, highlighting the absence of direct evidence linking her to Ramsay's body. As the trial progressed, it grew increasingly controversial, and the jury went to deliberate on the presented evidence. On June 23, 2015, after thorough deliberation, The jury found 61-year-old Donna Scrivo guilty of first-degree murder with aggravating factors. She received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. To this day, Donna is in a Michigan state prison. She has consistently maintained her innocence, but all of her appeals have been denied. Conyers, Georgia, 4:30 p.m., January 13, 2010. A police officer was doing his usual rounds in his patrol car when a 16-year-old girl, Tasmia Whitehead, came running over to the car in floods of tears. Panicked and unable to breathe, she said that she and her twin sister, Jasmia, had found their mother brutally attacked in her boyfriend's home. Items in the house were on the floor and broken, and the floor and walls were covered in blood. 34-year-old Nikki Whitehead was in the bathtub and clearly deceased. It was a harrowing sight, and her twin daughters were beside themselves. Police quickly identified a potential murder weapon. A cracked vase lay on the living room floor. Following the trail of blood, it was evident that Nikki had tried to escape from the house out the back door. But the door was locked, and Nikki continued to be attacked. She had been stabbed 80 times, and her spinal cord was almost severed. She eventually succumbed to her injuries and had been dragged into the bathroom and placed into the tub. It was clear whoever did this had made some attempt to clean up the evidence. But the amount of blood was overwhelming, and it would have been impossible to clean the crime scene. In the linen closet next to the bathroom, a stack of towels were missing. It didn't appear as if anything had been stolen, and there were no signs of a forced entry. So whoever had committed this crime must have had a personal relationship with Nikki. Lieutenant Chris Moon said it was the bloodiest crime scene he had ever been to. The police initially wanted to talk to just one person, Robert Head, who was Nikki's long-term boyfriend. Was it a crime of passion or a violent argument that has spiraled dangerously out of control? However, Nikki's twin girls, Jasmia and Tasmia, said this wasn't possible, as Robert had left on a trucking job the day before. They did, however, point the police in another direction. Nikki had another boyfriend called Joe, and the girls said they had heard their mother arguing with him on the phone into the early hours of the morning. The investigating officers tracked Joe down and questioned him. He appeared genuinely devastated that Nikki was dead and had no idea who would want to hurt her. When asked about the argument the night before, he admitted that it happened, but said that Nikki was the aggressor. Satisfied with his version of events, the team were back at square one. Around 10 a.m., January 14th, the police needed more information about the days and weeks leading up to the murder, and the only two people who would likely know this were Jasmia and Tasmia. They took the girls to the Conyers Police Department for a victim's interview, and the girls were still visibly distressed and extremely shaken. While in the patrol car, Tasmia started biting her arm. She explained she had a nervous habit, and it was something she did when she was stressed. A short while later, the interview began. The team didn't draw any attention to the scratches and bite marks on the twins, keeping their thoughts close to their chests. But it was very clear that the story the girls were telling wasn't the full version of the truth. One of the officers, Detective Swift, asked the girls if he could do anything for them, to which the twins responded oddly, asking if they could watch an episode of CSI. The officers felt at this point that they were looking at their main suspects. Although the girls admitted to having a tough relationship with their mother, this wasn't enough to establish any kind of motive. The team were also waiting on DNA evidence to come back from the house, so all they could do was let the girls go back into the custody of their great-grandmother Della. Officers began talking to Nikki's friends about Jasmine and Tasmia, and the friends painted their occasional fights in a very different light. The officers quickly realized that the twins had very much downplayed how severe and volatile these fights could be, and a dysfunctional and disturbing picture began to emerge. Tasmia and Jasmia Whitehead had both been straight A students, high achievers, and well-behaved young girls. They were talented in many things, including dance, music, and sports, and they seemed to be on track for a great future with dreams of going to the prestigious Harvard University. The twins' home lives, however, were a lot more difficult. Their mother, Nikki, had been born in prison while her mother was doing time for drug possession, and had left home at 16 years old after years of a tumultuous relationship. She was living on the streets when she fell pregnant. The twins' father rejected Nikki and wanted nothing to do with the babies. Nikki gave birth when she was 18 and moved in with her grandmother, Della Frazier. The relationship between her and the twins was strained from the beginning, with her grandmother Della essentially raising them. Although Nikki was trying to better herself and be a working mother, Della said that Nikki just wasn't consistent in her children's lives and would come and go too often partying and drinking. As Jasmine and Tasmia got older, they began to find their mother's attempts to discipline them hypocritical. However, in February 2007, Nikki met 55-year-old Robert Head. They quickly hit it off, and he took on the role of provider for her and the twins. He had them move in with him shortly after. He lived in Bridal Ridge Walk, a safe, gated complex in a well-off area with little crime. This was a fresh start for Nikki and the girls, and it offered them a sense of stability. Robert was a long-distance truck driver and spent a lot of time away from home, leaving Nikki to look after the girls alone. This was something that friends and family said that Nikki struggled with, having never really done it alone before. The twins pushed back and fought against Nikki's discipline. One night, a 911 call was made when Nikki realized 13-year-old Jasmia had snuck out of the house to meet her boyfriend. It was clear that Nikki was losing control. When Nikki asked for full custody of her 13-year-old girls, it was obvious that she and her daughters had a troubled and hostile relationship. Often resulting in physical fights, the trio were in and out of counseling, and the girls would frequently appear in juvenile court. One fight in particular got really out of control. One evening, Nikki phoned a friend in a panic. She said that she had locked herself in the bathroom because the girls were trying to attack her. When the police arrived, Nikki showed the officers scratch marks and blood. Tasmia also had scratches on her body and claimed that her mother had started the fight. Shortly after this incident in February 2008, Della took back custody of Jasmia and Tasmia. On January 5, 2010, the now 16-year-old twins went back to live with Nikki. The girls protested, saying they didn't want to live with her, but the court ruled they needed to go on a 2-week trial period. And tragically, just 8 days later, Nikki would be found dead. For months would pass after Nikki's murder, and with everything seemingly going quiet, the twins were back at school keeping up their grades as well as keeping a low profile. But in February, the evidence from the crime scene was finally back and analyzed, and it confirmed what the police had already suspected. The bite marks on the twins' bodies matched a plaster cast that had been made of Nikki's teeth. When Tasmia had been biting her own arm to pass it off as a stress-induced habit, it was actually her deliberately trying to leave new teeth marks over Nikki's. The vase that had been used to hit Nikki over the head was covered in the twins' blood. A pair of boots were also found covered in a mixture of blood. They had been placed neatly in a shoebox and hidden in the closet. The stack of towels missing from the linen closet were also found, and they too were covered in blood in the washing machine. These were things that a random intruder wouldn't likely do. With all this evidence finally coming together on May 21st, the last day of school, the police placed Tasmia and Jasmia under arrest for the murder of their mother. They had gone from being victims themselves to teenage killers. As soon as they were placed in the officer's car, they were heard shouting and swearing, maintaining that they had done nothing wrong. Questions from the defense team arose, arguing that the girls were identical twins, so determining whose DNA was whose was impossible. However, the prosecution argued that this was a non-issue, as it was evident that both the girls had worked together to carry out the attack. They believed that Nikki had woken the girls up for school sometime around 7 a.m., and the attack took place shortly after. They were caught walking past a gas station together, and then were picked up around 10 a.m. on the school CCTV, arriving late to their classes. But both arrived at the same time, further cementing the prosecution's theory of them working together. This, alongside the evidence from the crime scene and the witnesses that could attest to the fighting, was enough for a grand jury to side with the prosecution. On July 12th, both girls were indicted for murder and plead not guilty. In February 2012, while still awaiting trial, the attorneys for the girls put forward a request for a plea bargain. They argued that Nikki was also to blame in the situation. They said that her history of drinking and drug use played a part, coupled with her staying out late and often ignoring her children. They said that the girls simply couldn't take it anymore, and things had come to a head on January 13, 2010. It was on these grounds that they asked for the charges of murder to be dropped and voluntary manslaughter to take its place. The prosecution and the officers said they wanted to hear the confession from the girls themselves before they considered this. They met with the girls separately, and they began to tell a shocking story. Jasmia and Tasmia said that Nikki had come home drunk the night before the incident took place. She began hurling abuse at them, which carried on into the morning. When the girls came down for breakfast, things started to unravel. On January 9, 2014, almost exactly 4 years since Nikki had been killed, Tasmia appeared in Rockdale County Court to enter a plea of guilty to voluntary manslaughter. 1 month later, Tasmia followed suit. They were both sentenced to 30 years for the crime, and their attorneys said that this sentence allowed the girl some sort of future. Jasmine graduated high school in prison and served as class valedictorian. Her great-grandmother Della Frazier was there to watch her graduate. Nikki Whitehead was met with a terrible end at the hands of her daughters, and no one will ever truly know what happened inside that house on January 13, 2010. But the events that took place were undoubtedly avoidable and horrifying. They shocked even the most tenured of officers. The girls were incarcerated at separate prisons within the Georgia Department of Corrections. Tasmia is serving her sentence in Pulaski State Prison and Jasmia at Arundel State Prison. They were eligible for parole in February 2017, which they did not receive. If they do not receive parole at any point, they will be scheduled for release in 2040. They will be 47 years old. The case of Suzanne von Richthophen. The von Richthophen family is very wealthy and resides in the suburbs of São Paulo. Their mansion, located in the Brooklyn neighborhood, is valued at around $480,000. The home features multiple living rooms and bedrooms, as well as swimming pools, an office, and a large library. The entrance is defined by large gates, while the entire property is surrounded by a high brick fence. This fence is decorated with unique ornamental stones and plants to ensure privacy. The villa is owned by Manfred von Richthophen, a German engineer and director of Dursa, a large company that oversees highways and roads in the São Paulo area. His wife, Mauricia, is a local psychiatrist. They met while Manfred was studying civil engineering at the University of São Paulo, and they reportedly fell in love at first sight. Mauricia is known for her sociable and friendly demeanor, while Manfred is recognized for his quiet and gentle personality. They married and welcomed their first child, a girl named Suzanne, in 1983. For years later, they had a son named Andreas. The two children, Suzanne and Andreas, grew up in a wealthy family and attended the best schools in the city. Suzanne is described as a shy girl and was a dutiful daughter, maintaining a good relationship with her younger brother. Throughout her childhood, she learned 3 languages. After graduating from a German high school, she pursued a law degree at the University of São Paulo. Suzanne aspires to have a successful career, but she doesn't have to worry about finances because her parents are rich. Their family is estimated to be worth around $17 million, and it has been reported that Suzanne's father Manfred has around $10,700,000 in a Swiss bank account, which is intended to be transferred to her after she graduates. Suzanne had a peaceful childhood and a good education, which may have helped her become a good person. However, her relationship with her parents began to shift. At the age of 18, she began to think more about love than money. In 1999, the family attended an airplane model exhibition. There, Andreas met Daniel Cravenhose, a 19-year-old skilled model builder. Eager to learn, he asked his parents to pay Daniel to teach him how to make models. They agreed, and as Daniel taught him, Daniel caught the attention of Suzanne. They got along well, embodying the idea that opposites attract. Suzanne came from a wealthy, well-educated background, while Daniel had a different upbringing. He grew up in a low-income dysfunctional family, was expelled from college due to poor grades, and worked part-time with his older brother Christian in a local garage. Suzanne was a young girl who was polite, which made Daniel's rebellious nature seem both unusual and intriguing to her. Unsure of how her parents would react to her relationship with him, she chose to keep it a secret. Eventually, her parents discovered that she was dating Daniel, who had come to teach her younger brother Andreas. Initially, her parents were unconcerned and even allowed their meetings because Daniel presented himself as a law student who enjoyed building model airplanes. However, her parents later discovered that he was not a student and that he smoked marijuana, drank alcohol every day. Like all parents, Manfred and Mauricia wanted the best for their daughter. As hardworking and wealthy individuals, they were unwilling to accept that Suzanne was involved with someone like Daniel. Meanwhile, Andreas, who loved his older sister very much and considered Daniel a good friend, became their ally. He often concealed their meetings while they enjoyed time together in hotels or at Daniel's house. Andreas devised elaborate excuses to protect his older sister Suzanne from their parents, but she eventually invited Daniel to live secretly in their home. They spent the entire month by the pool, singing and experimenting with various illegal drugs. When the parents returned home, they discovered how their daughter, Suzanne, had spent her time while they were away. In the following weeks, the family experienced many arguments and conflicts, which only made Suzanne more determined. One day, she boldly declared that her father, Manfred, should buy an apartment for her and Daniel so they could live together happily. Naturally, her father refused. He told her she could do as she pleased, but only if she used her own money. Manfred also warned her that he would cut off her allowance. However, she then continued her secret meetings with Daniel. In the early morning hours of November 1st, 2002, the neighborhood around the Richthophen family home was shaken by screams. Suzanne and Andreas make a horrifying discovery. Their parents Manfred and Mauricia have died. Police arrived at the scene and found their bodies in the master bedroom. They were attacked while they slept, and evidence suggests a variety of murder methods. Manfred and Mauricia were so badly injured that they were unrecognizable. Mauricia's neck showed signs of strangulation, and a garbage bag was found over her head. It appeared that the family had been robbed, as money had been taken from a nearby suitcase and from other hiding places in the house. When the officers conducted a thorough inspection of the property, they uncovered several inconsistencies. For example, the alarm system did not alert the guard at that time. Upon further examination, it was revealed that the alarm had been turned off, indicating that the perpetrators likely knew the code. Additionally, the house appeared unusually tidy for a robbery crime scene. The documents and papers were scattered evenly rather than having been hastily thrown around. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, no electronic equipment was stolen, and some rooms remained completely intact. The circumstances surrounding the case remain unclear, leading to various theories. The media focused particularly on Suzanne and Andreas. In the face of her parents' deaths, Suzanne was surprisingly calm. In interviews with the police, Suzanne and Andreas stated that they were not at home on the evening of October 31st, 2002. That day, at 9 p.m., she took Andreas out of the house and went to a cafe without informing their parents. After dropping Andreas off near the cafe, she rented a hotel room and stayed with Daniel. However, by 4 a.m., she and Andreas returned home and discovered their parents murdered in their beds. At this point, investigators became suspicious. Suzanne's testimony contradicted that of her younger brother, Andreas. While Andreas stated that their parents disapproved of her relationship with Daniel, Suzanne claimed that they disapproved of her relationship with Daniel. Suzanne claimed that they supported it, which was proven to be false. On November 1st, 2002, the funeral for Manfred and Maurizio was held, attended by family, friends, and the media. Unlike her younger brother, Suzanne showed little emotion during the funeral, which raised eyebrows. It was later rumored that she threw a party just 3 days after her parents passed away. Witnesses noted how her demeanor quickly changed from grief at the funeral to laughter at the party, raising the suspicions of authorities. Additionally, an anonymous tip was sent to the police warning of a purchase made by Daniel's brother, Christian. He bought a Suzuki motorbike for a large sum of cash just days after the murder. This purchase seemed suspicious because both Christian and Daniel were known to be financially struggling and had no stable jobs, along with issues related to alcohol and drugs. Acting on this information, the police took Christian to the station for questioning. Although he initially appears cautious and insists that he is innocent, he eventually confesses to the murders of Manfred and Mauricia. Daniel and Suzanne committed a serious crime. Christian alleges that they conspired to kill Suzanne's parents to inherit $17 million. The police quickly arrested both individuals and began questioning Daniel. He provided details of the crime, but his account was inconsistent with Suzanne's statements. While she said money was not the main motivation, Daniel claimed that inheritance money had a major influence on his decision to engage in crime. Despite their deep love for each other, they broke up shortly after being arrested. Suzanne was arrested, but she was later released pending trial, which was delayed for nearly 4 years. She has spoken with her lawyer and agreed to be interviewed by local media. During the interview, she became emotional, blamed Daniel for the situation, and claimed he ruined her family. She described herself as an unfortunate girl who fell into difficult circumstances and always missed her parents. However, she could not convince others of her innocence. On July 17, 2006, Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian stood trial for first-degree murder. The jury received detailed information about what happened on the night of October 31, 2002. At 9 that night, Andreas left the house with Suzanne while their parents were asleep. At the time, Andreas was only 15 years old and completely innocent. He just wanted to go out and play. However, Suzanne had even more sinister plans. After dropping Andreas off at a coffee shop, she returned home by car with Daniel and Christian. Although the family's security guard saw her, he did not perceive anything unusual. After verifying that her parents were asleep, she turned off her home alarm system. She then guided Daniel and Christian into the living room, where they put on surgical gloves and hoods before taking crowbars upstairs to the designated bedroom. At this point, Daniel and Christian began attacking Suzanne's parents, Marisha and Manfred. Although it was very painful, they fought back fiercely. To quickly end the attack, Daniel and Christian kill Manfred. But Marisha is still alive. In a cruel act, they placed a plastic bag over her head and tightened it, leading to her death within minutes. They then staged a robbery by throwing papers around the room and stealing any money they found. They eventually left the house, and to create an alibi, Christian went to a fast food restaurant to ensure he was seen. Meanwhile, Daniel and Suzanne stay at the hotel, later asking for a receipt to prove they were there at 3:30 a.m. At 4 a.m., Suzanne picked up Andreas and returned home, pretending to be shocked upon discovering the horrific scene. During the trial, she blamed Daniel for the incident, claiming he had been drugging her and manipulating her into agreeing to the murder. However, Daniel and Christian argued that they acted on their own desires and Suzanne's plans, stating they were trying to defend a girl with alcoholic parents. However, no evidence of alcohol was found in Suzanne's parents. Additionally, her credibility was questioned, and prosecutor Roberto threatened to label her as a criminal. She was portrayed as an evil blonde, with the conclusion that her true motive was to acquire her parents' hard-earned money and assets. On July 22, 2006, just 5 days after the trial began, Suzanne, Daniel, and Christian were found guilty of murdering Manfred and Marisha. Suzanne and Daniel received 18-year prison sentences, while Christian was sentenced to 8 years for his involvement in the conspiracy. Suzanne then attempted multiple times to reduce or overturn her sentence. For example, she asked to be released, arguing that her personality disorder contributed to her crime. However, her request was denied. Since then, there have been several tragic incidents. Suzanne's younger brother, Andreas, had a hard time with the loss of his parents. In February 2007, 3 neighbors were awakened in the middle of the night to find their home broken into. They caught the burglar, and when the police arrived, he insisted that he had not harmed anyone. He appeared frightened and expressed indifference about his life. This man was Andreas. Shortly after this incident, he was admitted to a specialized institution. The family home was left vacant. In 2014, it was sold to unknown buyers who painted the entire exterior white. Many people sympathize with Andreas. He has a good education and a bright future ahead of him. He was raised by 2 loving parents, but in an instant, everything changed. His sister, Suzanne, and friend, Daniel, were imprisoned, and his parents were killed. It's no surprise that he fell into a deep depression. Despite the tragic murder of her parents, Suzanne is likely to inherit their wealth after serving her prison sentence. With a 40-year sentence, she could be released by 2042 and become a multimillionaire. Currently, both Suzanne and Daniel are serving their sentences in a semi-open facility, which allows them to leave prison for special occasions. It seems that in Brazil, even those convicted of murder can take vacations. October 8, 1975. The body of a little girl is found by the side of a remote road. She's lying in the grass face down in the mud. She has been subjected to a horrifying sexual assault and has been stabbed a shocking 12 times, with one of the stab wounds piercing her heart. What had started as a missing child investigation had now become a major murder inquiry. Little do people know at the time is that it will lead to one of the most appalling miscarriages of justice in British criminal history. At around lunchtime on October 5, 1975, 11-year-old Leslie Molseed was asked to go to the shop by her mother. The family used a rotor to ensure that all did chores, and children in the area were often trusted to run small errands for their parents. They lived on Delamere Road in Rochdale, Greater Manchester. 11-year-old Leslie lived with her mother, April, Danny, her stepfather, and her two sisters. Life for Leslie, often called Lel by her mother, hadn't always been easy. She had been born with a congenital cardiac condition, and an operation to correct this at the age of 3 had left her frail, with a reduced mental level for her age. She was told by her mother to go and buy some bread and air freshener from a nearby shop located on Ansdale Road, and in her blue raincoat, little Leslie set off. She was spotted walking on the secluded Stubbs Lane. Then she vanished. When Leslie failed to return home quickly, April became concerned and sent her siblings out to see if they could find her, and Danny soon joined in the search too. The family looked everywhere they could think of, but Leslie couldn't be found, and there was no evidence that she had made it to the shops. At 3 p.m., and with no trace of her anywhere, the family frantically contacted Rochdale police. Investigators quickly mobilized and formed a search. They checked the town and local area, interviewing people and looking everywhere to try and find the vulnerable young girl. While the police were searching for Leslie, for girls aged 12, 13, 16, and 18 came forward to the police. They told officers that a man had exposed himself to them the day before Leslie had gone missing. With a missing child and these 4 girls now saying this, the police quickly pursued the lead. He was soon identified as 23-year-old Stefan Kisko. Stefan was a local tax clerk. His parents had emigrated to the UK from Eastern Europe following the end of the Second World War. Outside of his mother and aunt, he didn't have a social life. His father had suffered a heart attack 5 years before, and he had died at Stefan's feet. He also had learning difficulties, meaning he had the mental age of around 12 years old. Despite him never having been in trouble with the law, the police quickly determined that he was the man they were looking for. With his poor social skills, his odd habits, including writing down registration plates of cars that annoyed him, and with the testimony of the 4 girls saying he had exposed himself, the police were determined to prove that he was their man. Just 3 days after Leslie had vanished, the worst fears of everyone were realized. Her little body was found by the side of a road. She had been brutally attacked and stabbed to death in a horrifying, frenzied attack. Her appalling death left the local community in shock. It made headlines around the country and left her family utterly devastated. On the December 21, 1975, Stefan Kisko was arrested on suspicion of murder. He was intensely questioned, with his story being picked apart by the police. After 3 days, he confessed. On Christmas Eve 1975, Stefan Kisko was charged with the murder of 11-year-old Leslie Molseed. Not long after, Stefan retracted his confession in the presence of a solicitor, but this made no difference. His trial began in Leeds in July of 1976, and Stefan's defense lawyer was David Waddington. David Waddington was a successful lawyer and member of the Queen's Counsel. Stefan again repeated that he hadn't killed Leslie, and that his confession was false. When asked why he had admitted it, he replied, "I started to tell these lies, and they seemed to please them, and the pressure was off as far as I was concerned. I thought if I admitted what I did to police, they would check out what I said, find it and true, and would then let me go. On the July 21st, 1976, the jury returned after 5.5 hours of deliberation. Stefan Kisko was found guilty by a 10-2 majority. The judge sentenced him to life in prison for the murder of Leslie Mansid. The girls who had come forward saying he had exposed himself were praised by the judge for their bravery and honesty in telling the court their story. The officers were also praised by the judge for their great skill in bringing to justice the person responsible for this dreadful crime, adding, "I would like all the officers responsible for the result to be specially commended and these observations conveyed to the chief constable." The mother of one of the girls said that Stefan should have been arrested sooner and called for him to be hanged. She said, "Children are a lot safer now this monster has been put away." Kisko was soon transferred to Wakefield Prison. As he was now not only a convicted sex offender, but a child killer, he had to be placed on a Rule 43 to protect him from other inmates. 3 years later, Stefan launched an appeal, but this was dismissed. Lord Justice Bridge said, "We can find no grounds whatsoever to condemn the jury's verdict of murder as in any way unsafe or unsatisfactory. The appeal is dismissed." While in prison, Stefan was attacked by fellow inmates. One of these incidents left him needing stitches. As his mental health started to deteriorate, he developed schizophrenia and began to suffer from delusions. His protestations of innocence were labeled as a symptom of his delusions. He was moved from prison to prison, but in 1991, he was admitted to Ashford Hospital after 6 months of delay for treatment of his declining mental health. Stefan's mother Charlotte fought tirelessly to have the case reopened. She was adamant that he hadn't murdered Leslie Malseed, and that he had confessed under duress. She took it to her local MP Cyril Smith, but he ignored her pleas for assistance in reopening Stefan's case. She was also stonewalled by Prime Minister James Callaghan and his successor Margaret Thatcher. In 1984, she contacted the human rights organization Justice, who examined miscarriages of justice, and in 1987, she was put in contact with Solicitor Campbell Malone. Malone agreed to take on Stefan's case. He consulted with Philip Clegg, who had served as junior defense counsel under Waddington in Stefan's original trial. Cloft expressed the doubts he had at the time about Stefan's confession and subsequent conviction, and the pair worked together for the next 2 years on a petition for the Home Secretary. The final draft was ready to send to the Home Secretary on the October 26, 1989. Coincidentally, that same day, David Waddington was appointed to that very position. He would resign in 1990 in order to take up peerage and become leader of the House of Lords. He was replaced by Kenneth Baker. It would be 16 months before a police investigation into the trial would begin. In February 1991, after receiving help from a private detective named Peter Jackson, Malone finally convinced the Home Secretary that the case must be reopened. It was then sent to West Yorkshire Police, headed by Detective Superintendent Trevor Wilkinson. This would set in motion an extraordinary chain of events that would blow the case wide open. The police soon discovered that Stefan hadn't been asked if he wanted a lawyer, although during that time suspects didn't have the right to have a solicitor present. He had asked for his mother Charlotte to be there, but this was refused despite his learning difficulties. Crucially, the police didn't caution him until long after they had decided he was the man they were looking for. The semen found on Leslie's body was also re-examined. Wilkinson found that Stefan was infertile and incapable of producing semen, meaning the sample found on Leslie's body physically could not have come from him. It soon became apparent that they were now dealing with one of the most grave miscarriages of justice the United Kingdom had ever seen. Not only was Stefan Kisko an innocent man who had been in prison since 1976, this also meant that whoever had killed Leslie was still at large. The evidence of the semen had been suppressed by the police and never disclosed to either the defense team nor the jury. They also found that a witness has seen Stefan visiting the grave of his father on the day Leslie had been murdered, and the witness couldn't understand why they hadn't been called to testify. The errors in the investigation just kept on coming. A few months before the murder, Stefan had broken his ankle. This, coupled with the fact he was overweight, meant it would have been incredibly difficult for him to scale the slope where Leslie had been found. This evidence was also not shown to the court. The catalog of errors made by his legal counsel were also in the firing line when it became apparent how badly they had handled his defense. On the first morning of the trial, the Crown delivered thousands of pages of additional and used material. This is where the defense counsel made a huge mistake. They didn't ask for an adjournment to examine them. Instead, they let the trial continue. They used the defense of diminished responsibility, a defense that Stefan hadn't agreed to. They said that he had murdered Leslie after receiving testosterone to treat hypogonadism, and this might have made him behave strangely. The endocrinologist who was treating Stefan vehemently disagreed with this argument, saying the treatment would not have led to that kind of behavior, much less make him inclined to kill. His endocrinologist was never called to testify to this effect. The 4 girls who said that Stefan had exposed himself to them were now aged 27, 28, 31, and 33. They also had something to say. They admitted they had made up the allegation against Stefan, and that he hadn't committed indecent exposure. They said they had done it for a laugh and that, at the time, it was funny. One of them was interviewed by police on Valentine's Day, 1991. She said she wished she hadn't said anything, and that she didn't think at the time it would go that far. She said she had gone along with what one of the other girls had said. Another one of the girls said they had seen someone urinating in public, but it wasn't Stefan. She also refused to apologize. One of them was a friend of Leslie's older sister, and she expressed the most remorse. She hadn't been called to testify along with the other 3, but said that if she had, she would have told the truth and not committed perjury like the others had. 2 of the girls received a formal caution by police for the criminal offense they had committed. In August 1991, the new findings were presented to the Home Secretary, Kenneth Baker. He immediately handed it over to the Court of Appeal. The judicial investigation began on February 17, 1992. After hearing the plethora of new evidence that proved the wrong man had been convicted, Lord Chief Justice Lane said, "It has been shown that this man cannot produce sperm. This man consequently cannot have been the murderer." And with that, Stefan Kisko was declared an innocent man, and his immediate release from custody was demanded. Anthony Beaumont Dark, a conservative MP, said, "This must be the worst miscarriage of justice of all time. It brings shame on everyone involved in the case." This brought fresh heartbreak for the family of Leslie Molseed. Not only did they now have to contend with the fact that an innocent man had gone to prison, but that Leslie's murderer was still out there. During the original trial, they had demanded that Stefan be publicly hanged, and Leslie's father, Frederick Anderson, had shouted a torrent of abuse at Charlotte Kisko after her son had been convicted. After Stefan was proven innocent, the Molseed family publicly apologized for what they had said. Lord Lane himself, Ronald Outeridge, the forensic scientist who had worked on the case, and the prosecution barrister Peter Taylor, all offered no apology, nor did any of them express any words of remorse or regret for what had happened. The original trial judge, Hugh Park, said that while he was sorry for what had happened to Stefan, he was not sorry for how he had handled the trial. The police submitted that they had been wrong, but tried to justify the action taken in 1975. All David Waddington said was that had all the evidence been available to him in 1976, the case would have taken a different course. Stefan required further psychiatric treatment until April 1992. He was then released. He had spent more than 16 years in custody. The hunt was now on to find the real killer of Leslie Molseed. The first problem was that in 1985, with Mustafan in prison and the case being closed, the clothes belonging to Leslie that had been taken from the crime scene had been destroyed. Fortunately, the strips used to remove fibers from Leslie's clothes had been kept. In 1997, a former detective wrote a book about the murder of Leslie Molseed and named Raymond Hewlett as the man who had most likely taken her life. Hewlett has served with the Scots Guards before becoming a fairground worker. It was after this that he committed a string of appalling sexual assaults. He was sent to prison in 1972 after using paint thinner on a cloth to incapacitate a 12-year-old girl before attacking her on the moors close to his home in Todmorden. Fortunately, she was able to escape. Just 6 years later, another girl was attacked after he pointed a gun at her back, but thankfully, she too was able to get away. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison for that offense. Despite 2 stints in prison in 1988, he committed another attack against a newspaper delivery girl, and he was jailed once again. After this came to light, the family of Leslie Molsey had campaigned in Todmorden, where he'd lived. They gave out flyers and demanded justice for Leslie. The samples from Leslie's clothes were sent to the Forensic Services Lab in Wetherby, West Yorkshire. After tests, they were able to extract a profile. And finally, in 1999, they had the full DNA profile of Leslie Molsey's killer, but he wasn't on the National DNA Database. In February 2003, DNA profiling was introduced, and this meant the police could check Hewlett's DNA against that of the samples from the crime scene. Came back as no match. The DNA wasn't Raymond Hewlett's. The police were back at square one. Alongside Raymond Hewlett, another suspect who was soon ruled out was Michael Horgan, who also had a criminal record involving horrific child abuse. In February 2001, the News of the World newspaper ran an article saying that they had discovered evidence that Raymond Hewlett, Michael Horgan, a third man, were potentially involved in Leslie's death. This was prior to the DNA profiling result. They alleged that Horgan had groomed Leslie in the weeks leading up to her being murdered. This, like all the other stories, would go nowhere, as despite their horrendous criminal convictions, the men had nothing to do with the death of Leslie Morst. It is worth noting that following a lengthy inquiry known as the Leveson Inquiry into the culture, tactics, and ethics of the British press, the News of the World newspaper was shut down in 2011 after a plethora of journalistic malpractice and phone hacking scandals were uncovered. In November 2006, the news came that people had waited more than 30 years to hear. The police had arrested a man after having a direct hit with the DNA taken from the scene. The suspect had provided a DNA sample after being arrested in connection with another sex attack the previous year. And while he wasn't charged with that offense, when they had run it through the DNA database, it came back as a direct match to a sample found on Leslie's body. The suspect was named as 53-year-old Ronald Castry. Castry was originally from the Turfel estate in Rochdale and had worked as a taxi driver before becoming a comic book dealer. His dreadful reputation preceded him. He was heavily disliked by his neighbors, who said he had an extremely nasty temper. He had an abusive relationship with his wife, and the marriage had ended in divorce in 1997. They shared 2 children, and 2 weeks before Leslie had been murdered, his wife had given birth to a baby that wasn't his. On the day of the murder, she had gone back into hospital, leaving him alone at home. When the police looked into Custry's background, they found a disturbing history of convictions. In 1973, he abducted and sexually assaulted a 9-year-old girl. He was charged £50 for the offenses of incitement to commit gross indecency and indecent assault. 3 years later, he was convicted again of indecently assaulting a 7-year-old boy. He was told to pay a fine of £50. Ronald Castry was subsequently charged with the murder of Leslie Molsey. He appeared in court on the November 7, 2006 and was remanded in custody. In April the following year, Castry entered his plea, not guilty. He was refused bail and sent back to prison to await his trial. During the trial, Dr. Gemma Escoff told the jury that the chances of the semen coming from anyone other than Ronald Castry was more than 1 in a billion. The court heard how Castry had abducted Leslie from the street near her home. He then drove her to Rishworth Moor, sexually assaulted her, then stabbed her to death in a frenzied, brutal, and savage attack before leaving her body at the side of the road. On the November 12, 2007, the verdict was returned. Ronald Castro was found guilty of the murder of Leslie Molsey. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum tariff of 30 years, meaning before he can even apply for parole, it will be 2036, and he will be 83 years old. The fallout from the case of Leslie Molsey was both unprecedented and immeasurable. Leslie's family had to go through the trauma of 2 murder trials, as well as the difficult realization that the man who had murdered their beloved Leslie had been walking free for so long. Tragically, in February 2014, Leslie's mother April died at the age of 74. In 1994, the surviving senior officer who had worked the original case, Detective Superintendent Dick Holland, as well as the forensic scientist who had worked the case too, Ronald Outeridge, were formally charged with doing acts tending to pervert the course of justice by allegedly suppressing evidence that proved Stefan's innocence, including the scientific tests done on the semen. In May the following year, The case was challenged by defense barristers who argued that the passage of time had made a fair trial impossible, and that the case was an abusive process. The presiding magistrate agreed, and the case was not put to a jury. Dick Holland had also served as an officer in the case of Judith Ward, who was accused of committing an IRA bomb attack in 1974. Her conviction would later be declared unsafe, and she was freed after 17 years in prison. Like Stefan, her case was considered to be one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice in British criminal history. Holland retired from the force in 1988 and died at the age of 74 in February 2007. After Stefan had been released, he was left a physically and emotionally broken man. He became a virtual recluse and showed little interest in anything. When people would approach him to apologize or offer support or encouragement, it would often frighten him. Upon his release, Stefan was promised £500,000 in compensation for his time in prison. He received an interim payment, but never the full amount. As on the December 23, 1993, less than 2 years after being released from prison, Stefan Kisko suffered a massive heart attack and died at the age of 41. For months later, his mother Charlotte, who had fought tirelessly for her son, died at the age of 70. The pair were buried together in Rochdale Cemetery. While in prison, Stefan wrote to a family friend saying, "I am in prison for a crime I have not committed. I am missing my mother very much. I hope there will be a happy ending." In 1992, following Stefan's release, the two families who had been torn apart by the murder of Leslie, the Molseeds and the Kishkos, met in person to begin the healing process. Leslie's father, Frederick Anderson, said, "I wasn't sure whether she would accept me into her home. I said some horrible things about Charlotte at the trial, for which I cannot apologize enough." Charlotte Kishko harbored no ill will towards the family, saying, "I never blame the family for what happened to Stefan. I have got my son back, but that little girl can never be replaced." Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.